I'm telling you, man, dealing with the microphone inside of OBS Studio is such a nightmare. I hate it every single time I deal with it. I don't even know if it's using this microphone that I spent a lot of money on. I really don't. I can't tell if it's the microphone or just the computer. So I've been doing videos about several of the old pieces of writing that I have saved on this computer. Stories and monster guides and stuff about Sonic and stuff about Godzilla. And I'm trying to go random video, Save the Earth Melee Monster Manual video, and just flip-flopping like that, and just varying it here and there. Because I only have a finite number of writing revisits that I can do. But I also realized, technically, my writing doesn't only include actual writing. I'm sure most of the people watching this video, assuming that there are any people really watching this video, because I don't really know if my viewership draws enough people, but anyone who's my age obviously has heard of the Yu-Gi-Oh trading card game. And more than likely you are what I would term as a Yugi boomer. Someone who only believes that Dark Magician and Blue Eyes White Dragon are the only Yu-Gi-Oh cards in existence. And simultaneously you also probably believe that Vanilla Beatdown is the way the game was meant to be played, and that those are the only good cards that exist. I go on a diatribe about how Pokemon is not the only group of monster card game fans with Gen 1ers, but I'll hold myself back. But if you've watched any of the videos on this channel, you know I love Godzilla, and obviously Yu-Gi-Oh appealed to me in that respect, because when you've got stuff like Blue Eyes White Dragon and all the other various dragons roaming around, it's naturally gonna appeal to me. Your instinctive reaction is probably just to call me a Yugi boomer, much like I've just called everyone watching this video. But that's not the case. So I started going to college back in 2015, and I can't remember what set it was, but I heard about the infamous pendulum mechanic, and it piqued my interest because the idea of monsters that were also spell cards actually intrigued me, and I also heard all the complaining online and how people didn't like the pendulum monsters and thought they were too complex. So naturally, my instinctive gut reaction was to get back into playing Yu-Gi-Oh and learn this new mechanic. Dueling Network was also still around at the time, so I joined Dueling Network, I downloaded one of the mobile Yu-Gi-Oh games, and I started playing the game again. And after I would be done with classes for the day, for example, I would go to the local Walmart that was near the college campus, and I would buy like the Megatins and stuff and kind of try to get back into the game. And I would say I was really into Yu-Gi-Oh up until COVID. I never made it to like any of the major tournaments. I'd never been to a regional or anything of real import, but I went to locals like 3 or 4 times. I even took my cousin with me to one of them. But I also didn't have the money to afford like a full-blown super competitive Yu-Gi-Oh deck, because as far as I'm concerned, I'm more of a Godzilla guy than I am a Yu-Gi-Oh guy, as I'm sure the content on this channel leads one to believe anyway. But at the same time, and as a result, I would play decks that weren't exactly the most well-made by Konami. They weren't always the most competitively viable. I wasn't playing extra deck Monarchs. I played Goki before it was cool, before Gumblar became a thing. I never played Spirals, you know, after the Link monster got revealed, whose name escapes me at this moment. I remember when Burning Abyss was at its peak. Shout out to Farfa. I used to watch, please forgive me for this, I used to watch Asian Eyes White Dragon, and then eventually I moved on to Mega Capital G, and then I started watching Simo, and then I watched Farfa. Hell, I even watched MBT. So you know the brain rot is through to the core. Now, anyone who's played the game for a sufficient amount of time, especially after Pendulum, knows that eventually we got Link monsters. And Link monsters are some of the best monsters in the game, but they kind of destroyed the Pendulum mechanic. Unless you're Triff Gaming, and you can put down like 3,500 negates through like 5 hand traps, Link summoning kind of killed Pendulum for the vast majority of people who enjoyed the mechanic. So even though I ragged on Yugi boomers, I kind of went through the same thing they went through with the progression of the game's mechanics, except I started with the Pendulum stuff, and when Pendulum got power crept to the point where it was no longer playable playable like it was meant to be played, I was kind of left in the dust. Now, Konami blessed us. And by blessed, I mean cursed, because a lot of the shit from this pack ended up getting banned at some point or another. Link Vrains came out. And Link Vrains gave us such amazing monsters, Cherubini, or perhaps more infamously, Crystron Halqifibrax, and heavy metal foes Electromite. And as anyone who knows anything knows, both Electromite and Halqifibrax were incredibly crucial for any pendulum deck at the time, because if you didn't have these, you didn't have any link zones, and your deck basically fell completely apart. And as I said before, I didn't have the money to dole out for stuff like that, because they made these cards secret rares in very particular packs, and so I personally only ever got Electromite after it got limited to 1, and ironically I bought 3 of it right before it got limited. What is all of this bluster about? Like I said, Link Vrains made several super good Link monsters so as to promote product and encourage sales of the new Link mechanic, because it was pretty obvious that there were still decks at the time you could play that didn't require Link monsters. But one of the most egregious examples of Link monsters in the Link Vrains pack, which we never got in the US, but they imported a lot of, if not all of the cards, in various sets in the US. One of the most infamous monsters in this pack was markedly not this guy. Zefra Metaltron was garbage. For any of you who are afraid of reading, and I know as a Yu-Gi-Oh card, there are a lot of people who are afraid to read Yu-Gi-Oh cards, I just want to kind of tackle this particular card right now for a second, because I was maining the Zefra archetype at the time. And to keep it short, the Zefra archetype was basically a bunch of pendulum monsters that were kind of like ascended versions of pre-existing monsters from archetypes that had no pendulums in them, that all kind of worked together. And just before this guy came out, we got like probably one of the best Zefra cards you could have possibly given the archetype. So when we got this, I was incredibly disappointed. Its summoning condition, first off, is 2+ monsters special summon from the extra deck. So right off of the bat, we're already off to a horrible start, because as I said, the Zefras were an ostensibly pendulum archetype. And without going over all the rules, because I'm not a Yu-Gi-Oh tutor and I have no interest in explaining all that stuff, basically pendulum monsters don't go to the graveyard when they leave the field. They go to the extra deck face up, and then the only way they can be summoned back is either with a card effect that specifically goes after face up extra deck monsters, or a pendulum summon. But because they're coming from the extra deck, under Master Rule 4, they have to go to a linked zone or an extra monster zone, which, if you can't tell, is why Zefra Metaltron has 3 downward pointing arrows, because at least if all the arrows are pointing down, that means that 3 of your main monster zones are going to now be open, and you can now pendulum summon to them. But the thing is, like I said, Zefra was not like a top tier competitive deck, and don't let anyone try to tell you otherwise. I know in the OCG, they would slap in one of the new really good monsters, Zefrath, alongside like the level 6 Yang Zing, and like the Yang Zing negate trap card that it would search, and just call it a day at that point. That's not Zefra, and I will not hear anyone else tell me otherwise. I don't care. That isn't Zefra. 2 monsters and a field spell being all you have to call it Zefra does not a Zefra deck make. But anyway, let me further review this atrocity of a card. If a monster this card points to that was special summoned from the extra deck is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, add 1 monster from your graveyard or face-up extra deck to your hand. Oh, that seems pretty nice, doesn't it? Oh, wait a minute. No, it doesn't. This card's dog shit. As I said, pendulum monsters go to the face-up extra deck and not to the graveyard unless they have been underneath of an Xyz monster at the time that they go to the graveyard, because Xyz materials are not treated as being on the field. So if you synchro summon, link summon, or fusion summon, or tribute summon using a pendulum monster on the field, it goes to the face-up extra deck. So unless you're like foolish burialing one of the Zefra pendulum monsters, there is no way to even activate that portion of the effect. But I hear you say. It can also recover stuff from the face-up extra deck. Zefra decks burn so much stuff trying to get their pendulum summon set up that this effect was basically useless at the time. Now, let me be 100% clear. I kinda have played the game a little bit since Master Rule 5 started. Again, I'm not gonna explain it, look it up. Watch Farfa or MBT. I know that's a really strange thing to tell someone to do, but they'll be able to teach you more about that than I will. And they'll be far more entertaining than I will as well. But I pretty much stopped playing the game around that time because I'm not going to look up the dates, but I'm just going to recall as best as I can. Master Rule 5 happened at about the same time as COVID, and COVID happened literally almost exactly the same time I started having multiple sclerosis. So I didn't really have any capacity or interest in going to Yu-Gi-Oh tournaments in heavily urban areas because I didn't want to drive in an urban environment and thus endanger myself and my own safety. But I don't know if anything has come out since Master Rule 5 started that has changed the core Zefra strategy in any way. And I imagine it's probably completely fallen to crap. I still do have Project Ignis / Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro on my computer, but I haven't touched it in a long time. I continue to watch Lithium 2300 whenever new cards get revealed, and I generally enjoy seeing kind of how the metagame is going because whenever a new deck is revealed or a ban list comes out, he usually puts out videos talking about how the new cards or the ban list changes affect the strategy of any number of decks. But I haven't played myself in a long time. As far as I know, SEMO, I don't even think SEMO is doing YouTube content anymore. I mostly just watch Lithium 2300's cross ban list cup videos, which if you don't watch them yourself and you're interested in Yu-Gi-Oh, I would watch them. But Zefra have fallen apart and they weren't really well put together in the first place. Anyway, let's continue reading this card so I can continue to dunk on it. You can target one monster on each player's field that was special summoned from the extra deck. So there's a lot of qualifiers for that right off of the bat. You have to target another monster on the field, as well as a monster on your side of the field that was special summoned from the extra deck, except for itself, and you banish both of them until the end phase of the turn. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but I believe what the intended use of this effect was to pendulum summon a bunch of shit, and then you banish one of those pendulum monsters because it was special summoned from the face-up extra deck, and you banish another monster on your opponent's side of the field at the same time, but it comes back during the end phase. So whatever it was, because it was special summoned from the extra deck, when it returns from the banished pile, it doesn't have to go to a link zone anymore. So that, I guess, kind of skirts the Master Rule 4 rules. But that's it. That's both of the effects on this card. Its link arrows are the most important part. But, as I said, you have to invest a shitload of resources into this card. It says 2+ monsters summoned from the extra deck, which means you have to summon at least 3 monsters or cheat a monster out that counts as 2 link materials. So it either has to be a link 2 monster that was special summoned from the extra deck plus something else that was special summoned from the extra deck, probably a pendulum, but maybe a fusion or a synchro, or you have to summon 3 things from the face-up extra deck. Now I imagine this is easier now because of Master Rule 5, but remember this came out during Master Rule 4, so you are most likely going to have to choke point yourself, make some generic link 2 monster, and then somehow get something else out of your extra deck to a link zone that it pointed to, just so you could open up enough spaces to pendulum summon to it. This card was garbage, and I will not apologize for saying that. Like I said, it may have improved since it came out and since I stopped playing the game, but it's a bad card. A really bad card. So what is the point of this video, you might be asking yourself? Well, random Farfa viewer, I'm glad you asked, considering that your intelligence quotient and available brain cells probably prohibit you from understanding what I could possibly be getting at. Much like most Yu-Gi-Oh players of all races, ages, and creeds, I have made plenty of custom Yu-Gi-Oh cards over the course of my life. I know I did it a lot during college because, trust me, I would do anything to get out of most of the coursework that I had during college. Computer science is not an easy major. But I wanted to kind of go back to many of these older cards that I designed, using one of the many versions of the Magic set editor that was particularly configured for the Yu-Gi-Oh card game. And I want to go over many of the custom Zefra cards that I made, and I'm kind of hoping that anyone who's still playing the game to this day and is more rigorously following the metagame will watch this video, read the cards, and go, yeah, this would be busted as hell. So we're going to go over these cards, and we're going to see what we can find. So first we have Brilliant Zefraslayer. And just as a quick heads up before I get started, I do not own the artwork to any of the cards that I include in this video. I just found pretty pictures online. This one I believe is particularly fan art of the Zefratora Grammaton / Zefrath card in like an evolved state. I don't know who made it, and I give full credit to the artist. There isn't much Zefra fan art on the internet, so I had to get what I could get. Okay, so it's a fairy Link 2, with 1600 attack, so it's not particularly beefy. During your main phase, you can shuffle into the deck 3 of your Zefra pendulum monsters with different names that are banished or are face up in your extra deck, except for Zefrath, and if you do, special summon 1 Zefrath from your hand or deck, ignoring its summoning condition. So, I'm not going to bring the card up, I might put it up on the screen, but basically the Zefrath card was incredibly difficult to summon. It required you to tribute, I believe, like 3 monsters to bring out on the field, which had to be Zefra pendulum monsters if I don't recall correctly. But as a consequence, it would tribute literally everything on your fields. So during Master Rule 4, the original Zefrath effect would basically be useless because the second the Zefrath would be summoned, it would be summoned to the extra monster zone, and you would have no link arrows, so you wouldn't be able to special summon any other extra deck monsters to anywhere else on the field. So it was practically useless, so I believe this effect was intended to kind of cheat out the Zefrath, ignoring its summoning conditions so that you could get the bonus pendulum summon that it had, while also providing link arrows that could then be used to benefit from that additional pendulum summon that it would grant. Because both of this card's link arrows point downward. If a Zefra pendulum monster is banished, you can destroy 1 card your opponent controls, and then you can only use each effect of Brilliant Zefraslayer once per turn. So that second effect, I believe, is supposed to combo with Zefra Divine Strike, which was one of the only Zefra cards that saw play because you could special summon the level 6 Zefra pendulum monster Yang Zing, search the Zefra Strike, and then you could use the Zefra Strike by banishing that same level 6 Zefra Yang Zing. And as anyone who plays modern Yu-Gi-Oh knows, or played during the kind of Master Rule 4 format knows, negating everything has basically become ubiquitous in the game. So Zefra Divine Strike was a pretty powerful card to the point where people were making those quote-unquote Zefra decks that only included as many Zefra cards as they needed to in order to use the Zefra Divine Strike. But this kind of gives you like a Dryden pop effect whenever you activate a Zefra Divine Strike, because whatever card you banish will trigger its banishing a Zefra monster condition. I don't think I wanted this to be incredibly generic. I'm pretty sure I was only making this such that only Zefra can really utilize this card, and it kind of works with the Zefra strategy very particularly. But I do believe there's at least one other Link monster that I designed in this kind of wave of support for the Zefra archetype. So let's go over that and the other ones that went along with it. Next up we have Sacred Timbers of the Zefra. This is a Link 1 Earth Plant monster. The fact that it's a Link 1 probably has aged rather well, because as I understand, Link 1 monsters have kind of become more broken than they were even when they were initially given to us. Like, they banned Link Karibo as far as I know. So this card has 2 effects. If this card is Link summoned, you can set 1 Zefra continuous spell or trap directly from your deck to your side of the field. And then on top of that, during your main phase 1, you can add a level 4 or lower Zefra pendulum monster from your deck to your hand But as part of the cost, you can also choose to discard an additional card before the actual effect plays out. And if you do that, not only do you get to search a level 4 or lower Zefra Pendulum monster, but you also get to search an additional one if you discarded a card on top of that. And you can activate both of those effects in the same turn, but only once per turn each. And I'm sure, as you can see, I pretty much wanted to make sure you could only search and really abuse the level 4 or lower Zefra monsters, but I basically wanted to support the pure Zefra Pendulum deck and basically cut any other deck from using and abusing any of this new support, because pure Zefra Pendulum was my deck, and I didn't want anyone else putting their grubby little fingers all over it. Also, I believe this is like, lore-wise, Zefrath combined with like the sacred tree of the dual terminal world. I don't know the lore for dual terminal, but I tried to include as much as I could from those archetypes and that story. Okay, now before I break this card's effects down, I don't remember exactly what has changed about it. I know I reread it recently off camera, and there is an old video on my channel where I had coded a custom Zefra card into my copy of Yu-Gi-Oh! Pro Percy. And I'm pretty sure this is just that card, but with different artwork, because I kind of had a change of heart where I wanted to take several of the older archetypes from the dual terminal storyline, which the Zefra were involved with in the proper game, and basically made them new members that were also Zefra members. And I believe this guy was one of those. Constellar Zefrantilae. It's a level 2 light pendulum effect monster. It has a scale of 7, which is one of the common scales that you would often find in Zefra cards. 100 attack, 900 defense. That basically means summoning it for any sort of attack or defense purpose was basically irrelevant. And it's a reptile pendulum effect monster. So I'm going to go over the pendulum effect first, because I believe that was the main purpose of this card. During your main phase 1, you can send one Constellar or Zefra monster from your deck to the graveyard, then destroy this card. You can only use this effect of Constellar Zefrantilae once per turn. You can only pendulum summon Constellar and Zefra monsters during the turn you activate this effect. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, people who have kept up with the game, but I'm pretty sure Constellar has gotten support in recent years, which was probably after I made this card, because I don't believe I made this card with any specific Constellar support or card in mind. I just know that sending cards to the graveyard is often very beneficial, so sending any Constellar or Zefra card to the graveyard was going to be beneficial in some way. But I do know that there were at least 2 Zefra monsters that had graveyard effects when they were sent to the graveyard, and that was Shadow Zefranaga and Shadow Zefracore. And Shadow was all about effects that activate when they get sent to the graveyard, so this was meant to kind of combo with those cards. But like I said, I also kind of figured that eventually they'd give Constellar some support, and without knowing what those support cards are or will be or could be, at least one of them nowadays has got to have an effect in the graveyard, or a card is only beneficial to you if you get it into the graveyard so that you can easily get it out of the graveyard. And I believe if you watch that old video on my channel, you can see this effect kind of going through, where you can send Shadow Zefracore from the deck to the graveyard as part of the cost for this effect, and then you can special summon this card. Now, I believe, if I don't recall correctly, this card does destroy itself, which I think was kind of a balancing mechanism to make it so that you can really only use this effect if you have another Zefra card in your pendulum scale that isn't Zefrath, because it can only be special summoned by its own summoning condition, or in this case, the Link monster kind of cheating it out. I think I made that change to this card just about when they started kind of backing away from nerfing the ever-loving hell out of the pendulum mechanic. Okay, what's the monster effect though? You can banish this card from your graveyard or face-up extra deck. Then target 3 Constellar and or Zefra cards with different names in your graveyard. Shuffle them into your deck, then draw 1 card. You can only use this effect of Constellar Zefrantilae once per turn. You can only pendulum summon Constellar and Zefra monsters during the turn you activate this effect. Okay, so I'm going to break down the 2 parts of this. First, the actual effect, and secondly, the kind of restrictions that it imposes. Firstly, banishing it from the graveyard, I believe, triggers the pop effect on the Link monster that we just went over. But also, Pure Zefra, while it does have a strong searching component, allowing you to weed your deck out and find the cards that you need, it doesn't have any draw power, and especially nowadays, you need that kind of thing in order to survive. Consistency is just as important as, you know, the pops and the negates. So I believe that was the motivation behind that effect. And the second effect is more so just conditions imposed on you during the turn that you activate the effect, because I definitely did not want this to get used in any deck that was basically just the pendulum pile, because I absolutely hate the pendulum pile as a concept. It's part of the reason why everyone hates pendulums, and it's why everyone thinks that pendulums are so broken, because if you just make a generic pendulum pile of cards, it's going to be good. So I wanted to kind of force you to be locked into pure Zefra and or Constellar if you wanted to use this card. And it's a level 2, so it can be normal summoned if you just need to get an extra material on the board to make a Link monster. And next we have Constellar Zefrapodis. I believe the Constellars had a lot of level 5 and beyond monsters. It's a scale 1, so I wanted you to have Zefrantilae and Zefrapodis if you wanted to play a Constellar deck that had pendulum monsters in it, but like I said, this was mostly designed in order to be support for the Zefra archetype. Okay, it's a level 5 light machine, so technically I guess you could use this to make Cyber Dragon Infinity, which, like I said, I started playing around Duelist Alliance when the pendulums got introduced, and that was a big thing at the time. I know it's still used nowadays every once in a while, but it was bigger back then, so 1000 attack, 1800 defense, it's basically irrelevant as far as stats go. You can normal summon this card without tributing, because tribute summoning is garbage except for in decks that are specifically built around it, like Gluandaries or Domain Monarchs or any of the other decks that are in that kind of vein. If this card is normal summoned, you can immediately after this effect resolves, normal summon 1 Constellar or Zefra monster from your hand except another copy of itself. If you would normal summon a level 5 or higher monster this way, you can normal summon it without tributing. You can only use this effect once per turn. Again, this was, I think, kind of designed as a response to the fact that Master Rule 4 basically forced you to make a Link monster in order to even be in the game if you were playing pure Zefra, which is what this was designed for. I guess you could just make a generic Link too, and I know even though Heavy Metal Foes Electromite is currently banned in the TCG, cards such as Beyond the Pendulum do exist. So hypothetically, this could get you into a free Link too, but it also does it by giving you an additional normal summon as part of the effect, and it kind of removes the tribute requirement, because I know Constellar kind of had a lot of monsters that were kind of locked behind the fact that they had to be tribute summoned. So I think this card was meant to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. But what's the pendulum effect? I can't remember the pendulum effect for this one. I believe the monster effect was the one that I focused on for this one, but it says you can reveal 1 Constellar or Zefra card from your hand except another copy of itself, then target 1 spell or trap card your opponent controls, destroy both that target and this card. You can only use that effect once per turn. So yeah, that's another problem that I think a lot of pendulum decks have, but also that Zefra in particular struggled with, is that there was no way to pop back row that could potentially be a problem for you. Obviously, if it was like an anti-spell fragrance or something like that, you were probably basically screwed anyway, but I mean, every deck has its weakness. And that was a weakness that was shared with all other pendulum decks. And then, in addition to the 2 monsters, there was also a continuous spell card and a continuous trap card. So we'll go over the continuous spell first, because that is likely going to be the better of the 2 cards. You can only use each effect of Zefrascension once per turn. During your main phase, quick effect, you can fusion summon 1 Shaddoll fusion monster from your extra deck by using Zefra pendulum monsters as material material from your hand, field, and or face up from your extra deck, and up to one Zefra pendulum monster from your deck. I feel like that one was worded incredibly poorly. Maybe I was in the middle of rewriting it and I just stopped in the middle of the night. I designed a lot of these cards at like 1 or 2 a.m. so. But I think the basic point of that effect is to give Zefra the ability to access the Shadow monsters that were pretty much inaccessible to the entire archetype. I know Zefranaga and Zefracore were technically Shadow monsters, but I mean, you couldn't even use them to facilitate any sort of Shadow fusion summons. And then the second effect, I believe, has to do with the Necros. During your main phase, so this one's not a quick effect, you can ritual summon one Necros ritual monster from your hand or graveyard. You must also tribute Zefra pendulum monsters from your hand or field, and or banish Zefra pendulum monsters from your graveyard and or face up from your extra deck, whose total levels exactly equal the level of the ritual monster you ritual summon. So that was mostly just a Necros summoning mechanic for the ritual monsters, but it kind of combined several of the Necros ritual spells from what I understand, and also basically let you use the face-up Zefras in your extra deck as fuel for those ritual summons, because again, you couldn't really ritual summon a Necros monster using the base mechanics of Zefra, and I'm pretty sure now it's damn near impossible. And the funny thing is, the Zefra field spell has its best effect locked under the condition of ritual summoning using a Zefra pendulum monster as material, so I think that was the point of that effect. And I think this entire card was basically meant to tie the Necros and Shadow archetypes into the Zefra archetype, which Konami should do and should have done long ago, but obviously they haven't done that. Okay, and the last card we're going to go over is this next one, which is a continuous trap card named Zefratonement, and it's a continuous trap card. When this card is activated, you can add one of your Zefra spell traps that is banished or is in your graveyard to your hand. So basically it would be able to recycle the Zefra Providence search spell card that became like a mainstay and a staple of the archetype. But as we can see from the cards that I've talked about today that I designed long ago, banishing Zefra cards kind of became part of this kind of revised strategy for the archetype that I had kind of envisioned in my head. Okay, and it has another quick effect. You can banish this card face up from your spell and trap zone, and one face up Zefra pendulum monster card from your field. So it could be from the monster zone or the pendulum zone, depending on where it is at the time, I guess. And if you do, activate one Zefra continuous spell or trap directly from your hand or deck, except for another copy of itself. But for the rest of the turn after this effect resolves, you cannot activate cards or the effects of cards with that card's name. You can only use one Zefratonement effect per turn, and only once that turn. I don't remember the exact point that this would have occupied in the strategy. All I know for a fact is that Zefra originally had a continuous trap card that was pretty good, but it was mostly garbage because the deck could never really pick up enough momentum or speed to make any use out of it. Oh, and so when you activate it, you can choose to use the effect that it has when it's activated that can recover either a field spell or a search card or a counter trap for the archetype from either your banished pile or from the graveyard. But obviously, if you select to ignore that effect, you can just skip right to searching one of the other spells or traps that are continuous. Anyways, I think all of the custom support that I gave to the Zefra archetype would have made this guy a lot more appetizing, far easier to stomach, because I believe this guy's banish effect, which I previously knocked as being garbage, actually works with the Link 2 for Zefra that I made. So it's not like I didn't want this card to see play, I just wanted it to actually kind of work with the Zefra strategy, which no one can tell me otherwise. It doesn't work with a pure Zefra strategy. Now, I know that there aren't that many people who play pure Zefra.
There are dozens of us. Dozens!
And I don't even play the game anymore, so even if these cards somehow got printed magically, it's not like I would even really be around to use them, but I just wanted to share because this was on my mind recently, and like I said, I'm trying to come up with content that isn't strictly the writing revisits or shedding tears videos. And I know I've brought up Yu-Gi-Oh! In at least a few videos at this point, so I thought I'd just go over all this stuff. Also, before I sign off and kind of do the outro, you may have seen my custom content online before, and I may do a separate video on these guys. But the YouTuber known as Simo, who I don't think is a hardline Yu-Gi-Oh! Player anymore, he once did a video about custom Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards, and I just wanted to put them up on the screen because I would highly recommend watching at least those parts of Simo's video, because I actually put a lot of effort into this guy, this guy. Anyone who commented on Simo's original video and talked about these cards specifically, just know, I think I've like screenshotted your comments, because I think the comments for Simo's video actually understood them better than Simo himself maybe even did. But I've been doing custom Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards for a long while, so I have a lot of these in the tank. So depending on how this video goes, I might do more of them, which it's not coming out for a while, but yes, this is recorded in the past. It's May 31st as of the recording of this video, but maybe this will make a splash. I don't know. You never know what the YouTube algorithm is going to do. Anyway, that's about all I've got for today. Time to put the auto editing machine to work, cutting out all the dead air, because you guys didn't see it, but there are a lot of custom cards in that Magic Set Editor set. I have designed quite a few custom cards over the years. Most of them are probably not any good, but I had fun making them. And in the end, isn't that what's really important? Anyways, you guys let me know what you think, both of the cards themselves, as well as their design and the kind of design motifs that I included on them, but also if you enjoyed the video or, you know, what have you. Anyways, I will see you guys on Friday for another Godzilla Save the Earth Melee Monster Manual video. I will see you guys there.